All right, it's started.
Hi, Icam. Today I would like to talk about how to not get fooled by glamorization. Like a lot of the ideas or products in our world are romanticized or maybe portrayed in a better light than they actually are in reality. And it's very easy to buy into that vision and then to be disillusioned by the reality of it. So a very common example would be to see that Big Mac, and you order a Big Mac, it is looking not like that at all. So that's just one example from marketing world. But then I think also all the traditional things that society expects you to do, like go to school, get good grades, study at the university, get a good job, get married, have kids, have mortgage, retire, then you will be happy, right? Each of those steps is also glamorized. You will be so happy right after this happens. So if you are still in high school, like once you start studying, then you will be so happy because it's so amazing. And then when you get the first job, this is going to be amazing. And the reality of it all is that it's not that amazing at all. What do you think?
Yeah, there is, of course, a wide variety of people that are trying to influence us in different kinds of decisions. And there's, of course, society as a whole. And I agree that sometimes we don't take the right decisions. And it's because somebody else or society is presenting us a certain thing and it seems better than it is. Now, I would say that most people know, they are rationally able to know that the image that you see of a burger is not the same as the one that you get. That a lot of marketing information is probably not trustable, and that they know the consequences of marriage, and they know that the marriage is not all that glamorous. So, however, at the same time, I do agree that still, even though rationally they do know that, they still take the wrong decisions. And the reason for that, I see that it's an emotional decision. And I would say the advice I would give to the person is just be more rational. You know the truth. Just make sure that you think about the truth and then take a rational decision. And you don't, when you're deciding, you're not overcome by emotions.
And I think like managing your expectations in general, maybe like maintaining quite low expectations would help, right? I think like movie industry also promotes and glamorizes a lot of ideas, including war. So if you watch war movies, they're all about like, you know, the strong bond between soldiers and like defending your country and standing up for the values, and it's just like all so glamorous. Whereas in reality, it's basically killing innocent people most of the time for the interest of your country or the corporations that are sponsoring the war or whatever it is. So there is such a big discrepancy between, you know, how we are portraying it and then how it really is.
Yes, I do agree with that example. I do agree that, especially in the US, and of course Hollywood's in the US, there tends to be a glamorization of people in uniform, flag, patriotism, when many times you're just dying for the monetary interest of some rich people and corporations, which of course
Yeah.
is not glamorous at all. But I mean, of course, there's a strategy behind it. When you take a look at, I remember Napoleon was a smart marketer. Um, there was a battle where they knew most people are going to die. And so the generals were discussing, so how can we get the people to want to fight this battle? Because nobody would want to fight this battle. We probably have to pay them a lot more. And Napoleon said, no, we don't. We just call it the battle for the bravest man, or for the man without fear. And of course, everyone wants to be a man without fear. And so they all joined. even though rationally doesn't make much sense to
Yeah.
join that battle.
I think it was also Napoleon who said something like this, that people would do crazy things for like a medal of honor or something like this, for
Exactly.
recognition, for rank. And those are all abstract things. The piece of metal is not worth you losing your life over it. But somehow in the narrative, glamorized narrative, it's like, yeah, you will be the hero. And then when they have those ads in the US, let's say for US Marine Corps or for just the military in general, there's usually like, oh, it's like such an adventure and you learn skills and like women will like you. So it's such an amazing image, right? Everything is going to be perfect. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, and I would also say that scientists, probably for a scientist, it's a much higher objective to get the Nobel Prize than to become a multimillionaire. Now, the Nobel Prize, granted, gives you some amount of money, but it probably doesn't justify a lot of the efforts you put in. But still, if you see yourself winning the Nobel Prize, it's going to be a large incentive for you. And so these are all examples of people that are taking decisions based on a certain image that they have in their head, who they want to be, how they want to be, how they see their future. And that seems attractive to them. And then they take the decision. And so coming back to what we said earlier, in many cases, those same people, if they were to just rationally analyze the decision, they would probably see maybe they're taking the wrong decision. But the fact is, everyone, we're just humans and we're just animals, human animals. And all our decisions are emotional decisions. And as they are emotional decisions, they are not rational. And they many times do not make sense.
And there's this quote that things don't have meaning and we assign meaning to everything. And that's one of the ways that we assign meaning to stuff that's maybe not that attractive, and we make it look or sound more attractive than it is. And then if we believe it, two things can happen. Maybe we will kind of hypnotize ourselves into believing that what we're doing is more meaningful than it is or better, or we will be very disillusioned. I think a lot of soldiers were disillusioned. And maybe like a lot of PTSD was actually coming from the fact that they were doing some things that they didn't expect they were capable of.
There is a lot of noise. There's like a lot of background noise from your microphone.
Let's try this on.
Okay, that's good.
Is it better?
Yeah, yes, okay. Much better.
Yeah.
Yes. So so we analyze the problem that most of the decisions. I would have said most of the decisions are taken emotionally, but now actually I know that every decision is an emotional decision. Even the decision that seems most rational is an emotional decision. And that many times, because of these emotions that are influencing our decisions, we take the wrong decision. Because the emotions, you need to step back and see, what are emotions? Emotions are tools that nature has used in order to influence our behavior. So nature wants us to do certain behavior, and this programming is then part of this program. An important part of this programming are the emotions. Now, if the programming was good, it was consistent with our goals, then this would be perfect. I would say most people would want to have a happy life. That's the main goal of most people, a happy life. Now, if the programming of nature was to have a happy life, that would be great. However, the programming of nature, according to millions of years of evolution, has been that the objective of our life, or of what nature wants, is reproduction, maximum reproductive success, the maximum amount of children, and strong and successful children that then have themselves a large amount of children. That is the goal of nature. And that has shaped not only the way we are in terms of our body, but also our emotions. So all our emotions have just the purpose to achieve exactly that. So we want to achieve happiness. Nature wants us to achieve the reproductive success, and there is a divergence between the two. And this divergence comes, one, because happiness is not equal to reproductive success, and two, because the environment nowadays is different from the environment it was many years ago.
Yeah, I'm thinking about kamikaze pilots. They thought that what they were doing was very meaningful and maybe will make them like immortal or something and like remembered and valued, but that was against survival and reproduction actually. Because
Well, yeah, okay. So we have to understand that nature has a program which does not look at the overall goal, which is reproductive success, and it doesn't know the current environment. So if nature would know the current environment, what nature would do is every guy would want to go to a sperm bank and be a sperm donor to sperm bank, because that's the biggest the biggest reproductive success if you go to a sperm bank and you leave your sperm at the sperm bank. Now there is of course nobody wants to do that. What people want to do is to fuck a lot and with a condom, which of course nature didn't know about. Nature didn't know condoms existed. So for nature, when you fuck, that means reproductive success. Nowadays, fucking somebody does not mean reproductive success because you're using a condom, so there won't be a child. Now that's of course a problem for nature. So nature didn't figure that out. But the thing is, nature does not look at the ultimate objective. Nature looks at like several small objectives. So as part of these objectives, we have, of course, survival. Means, for example, eat a lot of food. When food is there, eat it. When there is a lot of fatty and sugary food, eat it, because it assumes there is scarcity of food. So in an environment where there's a scarcity of food, that makes a lot of sense. In today's environment, that does not. I mean, in the civilized and like Western world, it has a program which says if your boyfriend or girlfriend is going out with somebody else, you need to be jealous. You need to feel jealous. So it's making us feel jealous because for reproductive success, that might make sense. However, for our happiness, that doesn't make sense. It has a program that says when somebody is cheating on you or cheating on somebody in your tribe, then become angry and then have a lot of adrenaline so that you can take revenge on him. Because if you do that, then this person will not do it to you and will not do it to the rest of the tribe, which many times anger does not make sense. But when there was, because nowadays we have police and we have judges, evolutionary, we didn't have that. And that's why anger made a lot of sense. So all our emotional programming was done for a time millions of years ago, and it was had the only purpose of reproductive success.
Yeah, and we still have some wiring from that time, like most of the wiring from that time, and now it's being exploited by, for example, corporations that want to sell you stuff, right? Or like they can show you that if you buy this product, you will be so prestigious and everyone will love you, and that will increase your chances of survival and reproduction. So basically, every product can be hooked up to one of the goals, either survival or reproduction. Like everything we buy is either increasing our like status and like whatever, or helping us survive. And
Exactly. So as a marketer, it's very important to figure in how we emotionally wired. And I guess in anybody, in influencing people, you want to know how people are emotionally wired, because we know that every decision is an emotional decision. What I would have said several years ago, I would have said the same thing as Descartes, the same thing as Immanuel Kant and Plato, who all said emotions are evil if you want to take a good decision. So always try to keep emotions out. What recent brain scientists have discovered, that there is no decision without emotions. The human brain cannot take any decision if we don't have emotions. And it was really interesting to read this, and it's actually a neurologist from Lisbon who discovered that. I don't know if you know this, the patient Elliot, from that Damasio, a neurologist from Lisbon, University of Lisbon. So that patient had a tumor in his brain, just around here, just behind the eyes, in the orbio frontal cortex, and it was removed. So it's a very small brain area was removed, and suddenly his whole life fell apart. And then the neurologist, Damasio from Lisbon, looked at him and he found out two things. One, he found out that he couldn't feel any emotions. So he could look at images that were very emotional images, and he wouldn't feel any, there wouldn't be any sign of any emotion. And he would talk in a very dispassionate way. And at the same time, the problem that he had at work and in his own life was that he couldn't take a decision. So the problem was he would go to work and he would see 2 parking spaces, and he would be half an hour trying to make up his mind in which parking space he should go. Or he would have to write something, and he would see more than one pen, and for the next 20 minutes, he would make an analysis on which pen to take, and he couldn't make a decision on which pen to take. So the problem was that he couldn't take any emotion, he couldn't take any decision. So then Damasio and further neurologists discovered that all the decisions that humans make are in fact emotional decisions. It's a comparison of you imagine the future, and you see, what emotion do I feel with this future, and what emotion do I feel with a different future, and I'll take the decision based on which future seems emotionally more pleasant. So, and that's a fascinating, it means, because every single decision we take is an emotional decision.
Yeah, but this is where glamorization kind of comes into play, because if someone is painting an amazing picture of the future where when you do what they want you to do, and you don't have any reference to the other possibility how this might look like, then you might buy into that and do whatever they want you to do, right? Like, if only you do this, then you will be alone. And then they paint just this picture. But if you, let's say, look at the statistics of like the failure rate of this thing and whatever, and how people are actually, who are doing it, how they feel, then you will have two different visions of this future, and then you'll be able to maybe make a better decision, even if it's an emotional decision. But still, we are projecting the future, right? We are imagining how the future will look. And for that, we need good, accurate information and data, and not BS from marketing or from the societal narrative or pressure, because this data will cause emotions to happen.
Yeah, what I would say is that if you ask a soldier how he imagines being at war, most soldiers will tell you a lot of negative things, even though they haven't been to war. And they can talk to people that have been to war, and they will hear how terrible it is. So it's not that much a rational problem. It's not that much that they don't know what decision to take. And I would apply this to many, all of the failures. It's not that you're eating a chocolate cake because you think that this is going to be better for you. No, if you rationally thought about it, and you would take a rational decision, the decision would be no, because you know that it's bad for you. It's really that there is the emotional hardwiring in our brain to take certain decisions, to not take into account certain other information. And so I think one of the ways that we can make sure that the emotional influence on our decisions is not too bad is to just be aware of it, and be aware of the decisions that we're going to take in the future, and make sure that we are in a situation where we do not take too much account of our emotions. So what I mean, for example, is if you are hungry, then a cheesecake would seem irresistible. So what you want to do is when you do the groceries and you're potentially buying a cheesecake, you want to make sure that you're not hungry. So you go to the store and it's more resistible. Then you come home, you get hungry, and you want the cheesecake that you did not buy, but it's not at home, and it's too much effort to go to the store. That's as one example.
That's a good one. It's a very good one. And I think just to also familiarize yourself with the opposite narrative. So when you are listening to an ad or to like society is trying to program in one way, listen to the people who claim the opposite, right? Like this is a perfectly looking Big Mac, but what do people say about it? I do think that sometimes people are like, oh, you know, cheesecake may be unhealthy, but if I have it just once, nothing's gonna happen, right? And then they make that decision 20 years and then they're obese. So they bagatelize, they lower the significance of the decision right now, and then there's a confirmation bias, as you mentioned. They will not want to pay attention to the information that's contrary to what they kind of already are emotionally invested in.
Exactly. I agree. I would say there's one more strategy that I have used, which is you are aware of the emotional bias, and so you write down, and you actually do write it down, all the pros and all the cons. And you make a table of all the pros and all the cons, and then you can give it a monetary value, or let's say a happiness value. How much benefit do I get? How much disadvantages do I have? And then you come to a rational conclusion if it's worthwhile, yes or no.
Sure. That's a good one. I was also thinking about the personality types and how different personalities will have easy or not so easy time putting more rationality in their decisions. I think thinkers and maybe intuitive thinking judges would have the easiest time to make decisions based on logic and structure and blah, blah, blah. As if someone is like a feeling perceiver, it's just like riding emotional waves and just like making those impulse, fast, intuitive, gut level decisions all the time, and being in the flow, not planning everything, not thinking about the future too much. So I think it's also like personality is important.
Yes, and I would add that it's important that you are aware of what's going on inside of you. Ideally, you separate yourself from your emotions, from your urges, and from your thoughts, so that you are sitting kind of on top of it, and you see, oh, right now I'm thinking this. Right now I am feeling this. Now, right now I'm feeling fear, and right now I have the urge for the cheesecake. But it's not yourself who has it. It's your body who has it, and you, meaning the person that you are, is sitting above it and is an observer.
Yeah, meditation could help as well, right? To realize that maybe it will give you some perspective on what's going on in your life and maybe to bring you to the happy baseline where you don't have any strong cravings because you're kind of happy the way you are, like practicing gratitude and doing some visualizations, whatever. And then after you wake up after this, then you are in the happy baseline, like as if you just woke up in the morning where you don't have strong cravings for the cheesecake and maybe the stress levels are down because I think cortisol plays a big role as well. Like when we feel anxious or we feel stressed or angry or whatever, we want this feeling to go away, and then we'll do these impulse things that will immediately give us pleasure, like reach for a donut or something, right? Because I know that this will make me feel better right now. But if you have some other way to make yourself feel better, like a breathing exercise or whatever else, physical exercise, then maybe that's a good replacement and will bring you back to the baseline.
I think it also makes sense to take a look at the programming of nature and how the programming of nature, of evolution, is not appropriate anymore for our goal, which generally is to achieve happiness. So, for example, the nature has programmed us, and especially us as men, to want to have as many sexual partners as possible to spread our genes. Now, you can say that this is good and there's a positive feeling, but I would argue that the positive feeling you get from sleeping with somebody is very short and it's not worthwhile to destroying a marriage. So, and I would also say that most people that are cheating on their partner are regretting it afterwards. So you can think about it and say, okay, this is the natural programming, and the nature has made that I feel certain emotions that I do want to engage in an activity, in a cheating activity, but I'm controlling myself and I'm not doing this. I would say getting jealous is something that, on the other hand, jealousy is something that nature has put into our brain, and maybe it doesn't make sense. Maybe we shouldn't be jealous. Or status, and especially again for men. For men, it's evolutionary. Most men were not able to reproduce. Only the alpha men were able to reproduce, which means there is, for men, there's a really high incentive to get status in society, and part of the status is the power and material possessions you have. So if you want to buy yourself a sports car to stand out, well, that's your instincts. And it probably doesn't make you much happier. Maybe it makes you happy a little bit, but it doesn't really, it's not worthwhile the happiness. And so if you objectively think about it in terms of how much money am I spending on this? How could I spend this money in a different way? For example, giving it to poor people that don't have anything to eat. You will see probably doesn't make sense to buy this very expensive sports car. But of course, your emotional programming is such that you do have the urge to do that. So again, I would say, be aware of those urges. Be aware that you want to be show off and want to have a high status, and you want to reproduce. You want to have sex with a lot of partners. Be aware of that, because if you're aware of that, then you're able to control it.
That's interesting. And I think it also depends on like the societal structure that you live in, because you talk about, let's say, jealousy and other things, but in Inuit tribes, the Eskimos people, they have this problem that they live in quite isolated tribes, and therefore the genetic diversity is very low. Therefore, if they have guests, they allow them to sleep with their wives, because that increases the chances of that. And I read that some tribes, even if they had enemy tribes next to, they had a ritual, like once a year, they would like swap, and they would basically allow the genes to be, enhanced by that. So it's very interesting. And maybe capitalism specifically glorifying celebrities, glorifying people who are photoshopped on the first pages of magazines, all of that is enhancing that need to be recognized by others, to be famous, to be rich. Maybe without this, you wouldn't feel that much of a drive. I don't know, in Cuba, for example, I'm not so sure that everyone wants to be a billionaire and like have sports cars and be the richest person in the world. Maybe community is more important. Maybe in Scandinavian countries as well, even if you have a lot of money, you dress in a modest way, and you're just like the community that's more equitable.
To some extent, maybe, to some extent you're right, but I would argue that most of our behavior is not society. I would argue most of our behavior is our genetic programming. Our genetic programming has not only shaped our body, but has also shaped our emotions and our urges and what we want and what we pursue. So for a man, and over the last million years, he was generally not able to reproduce unless he was a top alpha, which means the number one incentive of every man is to make a lot of money, in today's terms, make a lot of money, get a lot of power, get a lot of status, be at the top, because that's the only way that you can reproduce. So I would say, I wouldn't say, oh, society, capitalism has made us this way. And you can see that even in especially in China, when you have communism, it's the same way. I mean, there maybe the top politicians try to get the most amount of power, and of course they have many concubines, and because they have the urge to reproduce.
Yeah, but
So
then
I would say it is. I would say we probably say it's a bad human nature, especially bad nature of men because they are cheating. But I would say the most important thing is to recognize that it's inside of us, that our nature is not the what religion would want us to be, and therefore we need to first of all recognize it, and then we're able to act to control ourselves.
I think what you're saying is very interesting because it depends on the development of consciousness of people in different countries. So there's this model spiral dynamics that talks about all of that. And yeah, in China, people went from like poverty to having money, so now they want to show off. This is normal stage in development. And now in Scandinavia, for example, people are way past that stage. That what they were doing in the 40s or wherever. And now they are in like, let's create community, let's be ecological, very different values. So I think it's like with genes. You have certain genes, but which genes will express themselves right now depends on your environment. And culture and media and all of that can basically express some of those genes more or less depending on what they value locally. So, for example, the opposite of what you just said, that people want more status and reproduce, would be monks. And monks are a phenomenon in basically every culture. You have Buddhist monks, you had monks in Europe, very popular in some times, right? And monks have like zero status, zero possessions, zero reproduction, but I think they could be quite happy if they.
Sebastian, I mean, what you're saying, and I agree, but it's not doesn't contradict what I was saying. I was not saying that in order to pursue happiness, we are pursuing the status. I was saying that this is nature that makes us so, and I'm saying if we can be enlightened enough to become like a monk and to not need those material goods, status, power, and not need frequent sex, and be able to look at internal values, then I do believe you are actually becoming happier. So I do believe that that leads to happiness, but that's not the programming of nature, because nature, a Buddhist monk would not survive in nature unless he's able to reproduce. So that's why evolutionary over millions of years, the genes that have survived are those that offer maximum reproduction.
No, that's a very good point. But it's interesting that maybe by increasing our level of consciousness, we can evolve kind of past that very basic animal programming of let's just acquire as much goods and then like reproduce as much and all that, and just like maybe put that into perspective and maybe create cultures and societies where different values are valued and maybe more, equal and inclusive. I think you can see that.
I mean, I have to say I am quite pessimistic about it. There are, for example, a friend of mine. He was a very successful entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, and then he decided to come to Barcelona and be a farmer, an organic farmer. And so I was asking him, so why you choose to do that? Because it would seem that you're much less successful. He's saying, no, I'm much more successful. Now, and he's quite right wing as well, quite capitalistic. And he's saying, I'm on this organic farm. There are all these left wing organic chicks that come along that want to work on my farm, and I get to fuck them all, and it's great. So, the motive that people think his motive is, oh, he wants to sustainability and so on. His motive is just he wants to have an easy life and fuck a lot of chicks. Okay, that's a fair motive. But of course, he wouldn't say this to other people. And if you look at the religious people of the Catholic Church or of any religion, I would say a lot of them would behind the scenes would do very obscene things, or things that they would call very obscene, like child molesting. But of course, to the outside, they seem as enlightened spiritual beings. So I would think a lot of these people that we think are enlightened people and that have put self-interest and the natural instincts behind them are just putting out a facade.
Yeah, there is that big group that you just mentioned. I think it has a lot to do with, for example, if you want to become a Catholic priest, you need to apply when you're 19. So you haven't really tasted life at all. You haven't developed. You don't know who you are, and they will form you into someone. So of course, it has a high failure rate, like marriages that are, made at 19 as well. But I think if someone became, let's say, more spiritual with time, and they're like 40 years old, and they decided to like meditate more and blah blah blah, and they can have a perspective and they can go the right direction. Because also, I think meditation here is critical, and it's not practiced in the Catholic Church in the way that would be, actually leading to enlightenment.
I do agree. I do agree. And let me say again, I don't believe that hunting for status, for power, for money is a good path to happiness. I do believe it's in our genes, and I do believe that it's better to be aware of it, that we are genetically that's genetically our urges are towards it, so that we can control that. So maybe, Sebastian, I think it's a good time to summarize what we have been talking about.
Yeah, I was just thinking that there's also a personality component to the fact that you might want status or you might not want status. Like, I think at least INTPs are more like, no desire to lead, no desire to follow, give me my autonomy, I don't care about social recognition, I will say things that society will hate, but I think those are the true things and so on. So I think there's big differences between different personality types with that as well. That's the point I wanted to make. And the summary, you are the expert of summaries, I think.
Okay, so I would summarize that there are a lot of decisions we take that are wrong, that are not good decisions, because we're letting ourselves be guided by our emotions. Now, to keep emotions totally out is not possible, because as we have discovered, there is no decision that can be taken without emotions. However, emotions often lead us in the wrong direction, especially because nature has programmed not only our body, but the evolution has also programmed our emotions. And many times the programming of our emotions is wrong. It's wrong because the environment has changed over the time of the evolution, and because the programming of the evolution is for maximum reproductive success, while our personal goal most likely is maximum happiness. And there are differences. And some of those differences, for example, are that we are pursuing status, material riches, that we are eating as much as possible because nature thinks there is scarcity of food still, that we're trying to have the maximum number of sexual partners, especially as men. And all of this probably doesn't lead to our happiness. What we can do is we can be aware of that and try to change that so that we do take the right decisions. And we mentioned several strategies. So number one strategy would be to separate yourself from your emotions and from your urges and from your thoughts, and to be an independent observer. Another one we mentioned is make a table. Just write down all the pros and all the cons when you're taking a decision. Another one would be to actually get all the information. You want to take a decision in one way, well, make sure you get all the information from the other side, and just think about all the consequences of the decision, and make sure that you don't take an emotional decision too quickly, but you actually consider, at least for the important decisions, all the consequences and make kind of a table of cons and benefits.
Yeah, I would add to that just don't float with the stream without thinking for yourself, like, because society will push you through all of those things. Now it's time to study, and now to get a job. And if you don't say, hey, I need to do a check on this, I need to do research on it, I need to something I might not enjoy just because everyone is doing it, right?
Yeah.
So that moment when you stop and actually make a decision, because a lot of people don't make those decisions, they are just sort of pushed into those decisions, and they don't ever consider that it could be any different. Like, everyone is doing it, so I have to do the same. But maybe you don't. Maybe the alternatives are there. And also that average person is probably overweight, pre-diabetic, poor, and uneducated, and so on. So you don't want to do what most people do. If you want to have good results, you need to do what maybe 5%.
All right. So basically, not go with the flow.
Yeah. Don't.
Okay.
I
Not
think
go with the flow.
The flow goes in the wrong direction. Like, you don't want to end up as an average person at any stage of your life.
Okay. And one more thing that we mentioned is to try to take actions to in advance. And this is what I call fighting the sirens, because it's the same strategy that Odysseus used when he was traveling along the sirens. So he made sure he was bound to a mast. He was so that he could not go to the sirens, and he did this in advance. And while he was under the influence of the sirens, of course he wanted to go. He screamed, "Please, I want to go there." But the whole team had stuff in their ears, so they couldn't hear anything. So it's the same thing. We want to make sure that when we are not under the influence of our emotions, that we take the right decisions. So that would, for example, would mean you don't drink when you are out with somebody that you're attracted to, and you don't want to have sex with. Because if you drink, maybe you're more likely to have sex with them, or maybe you actually don't go out with them. So you ensure that you don't take emotional decisions that you would regret.
Yeah, and like you were saying also, not buying food you don't want to eat. That's a good one in the long run. What we buy, we eat, and that's very important. So the real decisions are not between what do you eat when you're at home. It's like, what do you buy in the supermarket? That's where your health kind of is. Cool.
All right. Good. So then I'm gonna